if you have social anxiety or you have any other type of anxiety, oftentimes we think, we worry about what other people are thinking about us, right?
Yeah.
But if you think about it, just imagine the amount of time that you spend thinking about yourself, right? Like your focus is on what they think about you. And it's nice to realize that most people are like that. So most people's focus will also be on themselves. So the date that you're sitting in front of is probably not sitting and judging you. He's sitting and judging himself for whether he's showing up right. And so it's actually nothing to be scared of, because you're just two, imperfect humans, like we all are, who can have a chat and see if there's compatibility, or just have a nice chat.
See, most of your clients, how do they meet people? Like, do they go on the dating apps and meet people through dating apps? If they go on the dating apps, then what we should focus on if we're looking for a committed relationship?
Yeah, so we are huge fans of dating apps, just because it's very convenient. And especially now, over the past 18 months with the pandemic, it's almost been like a must, right? Like you couldn't really meet anyone in person anyway. And essentially, we're big proponents of, like, the rules of dating are essentially the same online as they are offline. So the most important thing, we believe, is to still work on yourself, right? Because even if you learn the strategies and tactics of what to do online, it comes down to a basic human relationship, right? And so it's the most important thing is to grow into the woman or the person who can hold the space to be in that relationship. So if you do the inner work, if you assume that you do the inner work, then when it comes to doing kind of the strategies, dating apps are a great place, right? And so typically what we would focus on then with our clients, if they're looking for a serious relationship, choosing the app is not as important as potentially what you do on the app. Although, of course, there are different pools of people on different apps. So if you go, for example, on Tinder, or you go on some of those, Hinge or Bumble, those types of apps, they will likely have more, a bigger pool, but also more people who are not looking for a serious relationship. So you have to kind of wade through a lot of people who are looking for casual or other things. Whilst if you go for, more serious platform, whether that's eHarmony or whether that's, Parship, not sure which platforms you have in the UK necessarily, but those
I've not heard
if you
about
go for
that
something
one.
more serious, okay, that's a very good one. It's similar to eHarmony in terms of that they also do like a psychological test, and they match you with people that way, which is very helpful and very nice.
That's great. Yeah.
So those are more serious platforms. Of course, they're also paid, which means there's a higher bar of entry, right? So you get more serious people because you actually have to put in, you have to invest something to be part of it, right? So obviously, the more serious people are more likely to be there. But after that, essentially, the biggest tip that we could give and what you should focus on there is to keep an open mind in the early phases as you're going through, right? Because essentially, the same with, how initial chemistry is not really an indication of whether someone's a good partner. You can't really read it off a dating profile either, right? And that doesn't mean that you have to match with everyone. However, just getting to know, there's a value in getting to know just a lot of people, and then filtering down as the, because there's going to be a natural drop off of people. Some people won't text you back. Some people will ghost after a date. Some people, there are all of these different things that can happen. So instead of putting all your eggs, like, you spend an hour swiping through and you find 3 people you really like because they look really great on paper. It doesn't mean that they're great in person, but they're great on paper. And then it turns out that, they didn't text you back, or they weren't as great as you thought. And okay, but then you kind of wasted all the time. So instead, if you just focus on having, a lot of matches, getting to know a lot of people, and you view it as you're just having fun, and you view it as getting to know a lot of people instead of I'm looking for the one on this platform, because it's a very different attitude. And then you just essentially, it's as simple as it sounds, so you go with the flow and you just naturally see what comes of it, right? because people will drop off, and ultimately the partner is going to be right for you. It's a natural progression because you're going to want to spend more time with people that you match, like that you are compatible with, and obviously the ones who show up for you over time. So, and that's how you base someone's character and whether someone's a good match, is that they obviously show up and they're consistent with their actions over time as well.
What do you think about sex on first date? Because we hear different stories that people either end up being in a relationship with that person, or they never hear about them ever again after that first time. What do you think?
Yeah, so this is such a, obviously this is I'm not sure if you would call it a taboo topic, but it's just like, it's so discussed, this topic, right? And first of all, we just want to say that, everyone's free to do exactly what they want. There's just nothing wrong with having sex on a first date, and it's absolutely okay, right? Now, we personally, to our clients and to our community, we don't recommend it mostly for protection reasons, right? Because there's when you have sex with someone, there's a natural release of a hormone called oxytocin in the brain and the body. And women have a significantly higher level of this hormone released in their body as opposed to men, right? So oftentimes what will happen is that if a woman sleeps with a guy on the first date, and he then turns out to, like, he was only looking for a casual hookup or something like that, so he's, after that he's gone. That happens a lot. Then already after just the act of sleeping with him, she might be emotionally attached, and him leaving is going to be so much harder for her to handle. Like, it's going to actually pull on her heart a lot more than just a casual date would do. So it's protecting oneself from having that, like, heartbreak so early on. And also, if you just actually take the time to, actually want to wait a little bit with sex, you also naturally filter out, the men who are just looking for sex, because they don't want to wait around for that, right? So if you're looking for a serious relationship, then you kind of naturally just filter out the guys who are not serious enough about pursuing a serious relationship. So this is just another benefit as well.
Yeah, that's very true. What are the green flags and red flags of dating? Because I think that in the first few dates, we can already see so much. Sometimes we pretend that we are blind and we can't see the red flags, but it's really important in the early stage of dating to see the green and the red flags. Can you give me some examples of them, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're going to take one thing away from this podcast, it will just to be that what you want to look for is consistent action over time. Okay, like, that's the most important thing. So someone who is dependable, someone who will show up for you over time. Okay, because that shows a strong interest, it shows strong commitment, it just inherently in that are just like built in a lot of good traits that you want. Okay. So if we talk about green flags, obviously there are a lot of them, but the most important ones is, obviously you want to assess this over time. It's just not a one-time occurrence necessarily, but someone who's trustworthy. You obviously want someone who's trustworthy. So that could be as simple as, if he says that he's gonna, set up a date with you next week, he follows up and he does it, right? If he says, he follows through on what he says, that gives an early indication of whether someone, you can trust his words, right? So if someone doesn't follow up on his words, it's obviously naturally also then a bit of a red flag, right? Of course, things can happen. So we are never a proponent of, like, you see one thing and they're just like, cut them off. But being open-minded to that things can, there are circumstances around this, but that's a general thing to look for. As you said, dependable, someone who's dependable, who will actually show up for you when you need it, who's there. And, we also look for someone who is comfortable in their own skin, is what we call it, right? And that means what you want to look for is, because there's a misconception with in the dating environment with this whole, like, for example, the alpha culture, right? Like, you want to find an alpha male. I actually learned yesterday was a funny story in terms of how this alpha male concept came to be.
Okay.
In terms of there was a guy who did a study back in the 50s or something, a long time ago, about like looking at wolves, right? Like, and that's where the term is coming from. And they saw that there was like a leader of the pack, and that's kind of like the alpha male of the pack.
Okay.
However, he tried to replicate the study, 10 years or 20 years later, and he was never able to do it because it turns out actually kind of the leader of the wolf was just the parents of the pack, right? Like so it's just the parents. And so the whole misconception is like there's this alpha male who's like the leader and the coolest guy, and everyone should go for alpha males, right? So it was just a little funny, but so we think it's important to kind of distinguish between someone who is just this like self-proclaimed alpha male, where they're the most outgoing and confident guy in the room, and then like all the girls want that guy, which we just don't think is true at all. But instead, what you want is like, you can have the quiet introvert, right? Like, that's great, right? Like you don't need the leader of the pack. Like,
absolutely.
Why? But someone who is like comfortable with who they are, right? Like they don't feel the need to be someone else, and not say like in the sense of if they're comfortable with who they are, they will also be comfortable with who you are, right? So they will be able to hold the space for you being yourself, and that's essentially just the most like that's an important part of having a nice dynamic and balance in that, because they won't try to or want to change you in that way.
Yeah. Do you believe that once we start the healing journey, because that's what I've noticed about myself, once I start a healing journey, I feel attracted to completely different kind of man than I was attracted before. So the guys that I used to go for, I don't find them attractive anymore. Do you believe in that? Yeah, that's what happens.
And if you found that, yes, 100%, is a scientific fact as well, as in terms of like that's part of psychology. And so if you found that has happened, it's a very good sign that you're on the right way, right? Like that you're doing really well. So in terms of that, what happens is that there will be oftentimes if you haven't healed, right? Like you have these childhood wounds or traumas, right? Like you haven't really healed through. And it can be anything, right? Like we often have clients to say like, oh no, but my childhood was great, etc., right? Like they can't really think of like they weren't abused or anything like that. So
that could be something little,
huge, but it's so small, right? Like that's what people don't realize. Is the trauma just means like there was this time when your dad yelled at you and you didn't understand why he yelled. So you weren't able to process that properly, and you assumed that something was wrong with you. And suddenly you're taking on this core belief that, oh, I'm doing something wrong, and your whole life kind of becomes circled around that. And so, and typically, if you haven't done the healing, we will be attracted to people who almost, that we hope will be able to fill that void, right? Like to heal that wound within us, right? Because if we feel like we're not worthy of love, we will automatically be attracted to people who we think can make us worthy of love. That's why the people who fall for example, narcissists and don't see the red flags is that they themselves are typically very insecure. And so they want to be with someone who is perceived as very great, because obviously narcissists are like, they think highly of themselves, right? Like, so they hope that by being with a narcissist, their own self-worth is going to be heightened as well through this process. And so when you do the healing journey and you yourself you don't base your attraction through these wounds, what you'll have is, and what you'll experience is just healthy love, right? Like that's when you come to the place of being able to have healthy love, where you don't need a person to fulfill you, and you don't need a person who's going to complement, like is going to complete you, but instead you just find a person who's going to be a really good teammate, right? Where you're interdependent, but you're not codependent, right? And so it's a very great sign if you start attracting people who are just, and a lot of people who have been in kind of those like toxic relationships and been in, attracted to those type of guys, whether it's like the playboys or the bad guys, and that kind of group of people, oftentimes they'll find, initially they'll suddenly find a relationship which is healthy. They will find it boring, right? Like that's
Yeah,
kind of what we
yeah.
care. Like, oh, but there's no fireworks, and where's all
Yeah,
the drama? And
yeah.
like, I don't know.
Where's
And
push and
because
pull,
there's so,
hot and cold? Where is it?